I call this meeting to order. Good day. It's great to see everyone here. And Ms. Hogan on Zoom. Nice to see you as well. Welcome to meeting number 25 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083G, the committee is meeting today to undertake a follow-up study on Report 3, Access to Safe Drinking Water in First Nations Communities, Indigenous Service Canada, of the 2021 report of the Auditor General of Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Compte tenu de la directive du Bureau de Régie interne du 10 mars 2020.
And given the Bureau directive of March 10, 2022, all participants should be wearing a mask except members when they are sitting and during proceedings. And please wait to be given the floor and activate your microphone. And please go back to mute.
Your floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Pour les députés présents dans la salle, si vous souhaitez prendre...
For members who are present in the room, please raise your hand, and if you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and myself will do our best to maintain orderly proceedings.
Completed the required connection test in advance of the meeting. Before we go to the witnesses and begin the meeting, I'd like to just mention that if there's agreement, and if members have felt we have exhausted all our questions, I'd like to reserve the last 20-30 minutes of the meeting to discuss the report on the public accounts, if everyone is okay at that. So we will certainly get through the first three rounds, and if there's agreement to let the fourth round go, which is a shorter round, we'll turn to a discussion on the public accounts report. And I will check with everyone when we get to that time in the meeting at probably 12:30. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, the Auditor General of Canada, and Glenn Wheeler, the Principal. There he is. I wasn't sure where Mr. Wheeler was, but I see him now. Department of Indigenous Services, welcoming them back. Christian Fox, the Deputy Minister. It's very nice to see you today. And Nelson Barbosa. Do I have that right, sir? Barbosa, thank you very much. I endeavored to practice beforehand. Nelson Barbosa, excuse me, Acting Director General, Community Infrastructure Branch, Regional Operations. Turning now to Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Merci. Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss the access to safe drinking water in First Nations communities. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I am Karen, and here with Glenn Wheeler, the principal who was responsible for the audit. As we have not concluded any new audit work since we presented our report to Parliament in February 2021, I will provide today a brief overview of last year's audit findings. Reliable access to safe drinking water is vital to the health and well-being of all, including the people living in the more than 600 First Nations communities across Canada. A key component of reconciliation is eliminating long-term drinking water advisories on public water systems on First Nations reserves and addressing community infrastructure needs. In 2015, the federal government committed to eliminating all long-term drinking water advisories on public water systems on First Nations reserves by March 31st, 2021. We reported that 60 remained in effect on 41 First Nations communities as at November 1st, 2020. Almost half had been in effect for over a decade.
We found that some long-term advisories were lifted only as a result of interim measures that did not fully address the underlying deficiencies. For some of these water systems, long-term solutions were not expected to be completed until 2025. We also found that Indigenous Services Canada's efforts had been constrained by an outdated policy and formula for funding the operation and maintenance of public water systems. The department had not amended the funding formula since it was first developed 30 years ago. Until the formula is updated, it is unclear whether funding increases will be sufficient to meet First Nations water infrastructure needs. Following the tabling of our report, the department presented this committee with a detailed action plan that addressed our recommendations. Many of the milestones that the department had set have passed. I'm pleased to see that the committee is revisiting this report. As I said last week, this is an example of results being slow to follow the department's original commitments. To improve the situation for First Nations communities, actions have to catch up to words. The committee's ongoing follow-up is critically important. The committee may wish to ask the department what progress it has made to eliminate all long-term drinking water advisories. As well, it may wish to inquire about progress on co-developing a legislative framework for safe drinking water and a long-term strategy for water infrastructure. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan. I'm just going to pause for a second. Just want to make sure the translation's working okay. Puis tout va bien? Oui, très bien. Okay. Turn down to Ms. Fox. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please. Or pardon me. Yes, 5 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Kwekwe, Ukuluk, Tansi, hello, bonjour. Merci de m'avoir invité ici aujourd'hui. J'aimerais commencer.
Thank you for inviting me today here. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that we are together on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm pleased to give an update on the department's progress regarding the recommendations made by the Auditor General in Report 3, Access to Safe Drinking Water in First Nations Community. The department continues to work with and support First Nations as the owners and operators of their water systems to address all remaining long-term drinking water advisories as soon as possible regarding the quality of drinking water. Since our department last appeared before this committee in April 2021, 43 short-term drinking water advisories have been lifted, preventing them from becoming long-term advisories. In addition, 26 long-term drinking water advisories have been lifted. As of May 31st, 2022, 132 long-term drinking water advisories had been lifted in First Nations communities since 2015. In addition, 219 short-term drinking water advisories have been prevented from becoming long-term. Work is underway to lift all 34 remaining long-term drinking water advisories, affecting 29 communities on public systems on reserves.
Implement projects that address long-term needs of communities affected by long-term drinking water advisories. Where interim measures have been implemented to lift drinking water advisories, long-term solutions are at various stages of implementation. We continue to advocate for a continuation of program funding to ensure support for water and wastewater services in First Nations, with the objective of obtaining long-term stable funding, including targeted funding to enhance capacity training measures and retain water operators. Since 2016, the Government of Canada has committed over $5.6 billion to First Nations to upgrade water and wastewater infrastructure on reserve, to better support the operation and maintenance of these systems, and to improve the monitoring and testing of community drinking water, and to support ongoing efforts to eliminate and prevent long-term drinking water advisories. We continue to work with First Nations to help with annual performance inspections of water system. We also undertook a pilot program for a new asset inspection process that is now being rolled out on a 3-year cycle. In addition to providing a more comprehensive review of asset deficiencies, this new inspection process identifies future capital requirements, allowing communities to proactively plan and undertake major maintenance and asset replacement activities before assets fail. We will continue to proactively work with communities to prevent recurring advisories. One of the OIG recommendations was related to the department identifying how much funding is needed by First Nations to operate and to maintain drinking water infrastructure, and also amend the existing funding formula to provide sufficient operations and maintenance funding in future years. I'm pleased to say the department implemented this recommendation in July of 2021. The existing O&M funding formula has been updated to better reflect actual costs, and the increase in funding has already started flowing directly to First Nations. ISC will continue to cover 100%, which is up from 80% of the O&M formula funding for water and wastewater systems. Another recommendation was for the department to work with First Nations to develop and implement a regulatory regime for safe drinking water. The recent court-approved Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Class Action Settlement Agreement commits Canada to making all reasonable efforts to introduce legislation to repeal the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act by March 31st, 2022, and to develop and introduce a replacement legislation in consultations with First Nations by December 31st, 2022. Le Canada et l'Assemblée des Premières Nations travaillent à l'élaboration.
Canada and the AFN are working to co-develop a draft framework to inform development of proposed legislation to replace the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. Finally, in Budget 2002, we propose to deliver over $172.2 million over 10 years, starting in 22-23, to support the transfer of water and wastewater services into 17 communities in the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority. By putting service delivery into the hands of the communities themselves, this first-of-a-kind initiative led by First Nations will help to chart the path to self-determination, all the while strengthening the management of water and wastewater infrastructure on reserves. I look forward to answering your questions. Miigwech, kuyanamik, merci.
The hearing is a little unusual because we're calling witnesses back as well as members here to review a previous report because of the importance that members around this table think this study or this issue is deserving. I'm going to begin the first round of questions. MP Schmale, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Ms. Fox, good to see you again. Want to start with, as you know, in early February, the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee requested that the PBO do a comparative study based on how much money is being spent. As we know, it's more than ever, but the results are not the same. And I'll quote here, as I mentioned, the spending has gone up, but the analysis showed that it did not result in an improvement in the ability to First Nations themselves, but also the department to achieve the goals they have set for themselves. And Parliamentary Budget Officer specifically quoted, "This was partly driven by the volatility in the department result indicators. Many were added or removed over the course of the period, preventing results from being collected due to data collection lags. Some of the indicators lacked target values and completion dates altogether." And also because of that, it was hard to actually locate when these targets will be completed. Going on to that, we have the Auditor General's report showing that as of March 31st, all remaining boil water advisories were to be lifted. That was not the case. So based on this kind of moving of the goalpost, so to speak, and I know we've talked about that in INAN committee quite often, how confident are you that we will be able to achieve these new targets?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the question. I think I would have a few sort of comments on that. The first is, I think it's important to note that the parliamentary budget officer did indicate that on the capital side that the funding was there, and I think that's an important part of that that report. But I think on the what I would say is where we have put a lot of emphasis is on operations and maintenance, because in order to ensure sort of the long-term sustainability of these water infrastructure systems, that O&M is absolutely fundamental. So the shift that we made was we actually moved to an industry standard of how we did the O&M formula. So that includes kind of what is the actual asset that's being purchased, what is some of the the equipment that's linked to it, what are some of the factors like remoteness or proximity to a city in order to determine what the actual appropriate O&M cost is. And so I would say that a lot of these changes have led to, I think, better supports with 100% funding that is actually more accurate to the asset of a particular community. But also I would say that we've built in some flexibility, that if there's a particular asset that falls kind of above the formula base that we have indicated, there's flexibility for us to work with the community and adjust that formula to give them the funding that they require. On the results themselves, I think that, we have enormous sort of activity in the department around infrastructure at large and assets, whether it's education, health, water. And so we have definitely put an emphasis on tracking the results of the long-term drinking water advisories that exist, the 34, but it is not unique to that. And so the results, we have an action plan for every single community that is on a long-term drinking water advisory and a short-term. But beyond that, through the work with communities on their broader infrastructure needs, we are tracking what does the community prioritize in terms of their infrastructure needs, and then how do we track builds, completions, homes. So I think there's a more rigorous process around results and indicators. But I would say that particularly to the water advisory, for every single one of them that exist, we have an analysis of engagement with the community and the work that's being done. What are some of the short-term measures to address some of the urgent needs, and what the long-term plan is?
Okay, thank you. I am short on time, so I might have to interrupt, unfortunately. Okay, as we pointed out, we talked about your action plans. We talked about increased funding. However, in 2019-2020, that fiscal year, it was 306 out of 718 water systems were still rated as high or medium risk. Judging by exactly what you said, new strategies, new money, why?
Why are they still?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that these new strategies, new systems don't turn over overnight, right? So we've had to, there's a lot of operation and capacity needs that exist in communities now. And so I think that obviously we are starting to see the benefits of investments, the benefits of the changes that we've made, but I do believe that it will take a number of years. And I would say water operators is a key consideration. I was up in Cat Lake and I met with their water operator. There's one person in Cat Lake doing the water operations of their plant. He took me through the plant. But the biggest risk that he has in his community is he is the sole water operator. So if something happens to him, the system is at risk. And so those are the type of things that we have to address. There's training, there's funding, there's, and I think through the Atlantic Water Authority, this is part of what we're trying to build, is that capacity to transform system.
Well, I'm just asking. I'm not trying to be combative in any way. But the number of medium to high risk has relatively remained the same for the past almost 10 years now. But all these new things have been put in place, but we're not seeing the results here. I'm very concerned that we're not actually going to meet those targets.
Well, I think some of the results we are seeing, like there's 7,000 homes that have access to water that didn't before. There's 528 community buildings. So I think there are shifts. There are new treatment plants that are operational. And I think that the long-term funding and the additional investments into O&M is also going to address some of the new systems that come into play. And to be fair, as we build more housing, we build health infrastructure, we need water plants to support these new builds as well. So I think that we are seeing some progress, but there is a lot of work left to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Smale. I'm afraid that your time is exhausted. Turning now to Mr. Fragascato. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Fox and Mr. Barbosa, for being here and for your work again. Let's actually just follow up on that point in terms of things that that have improved, achievements that you would point to, Ms. Fox, that really stand out, just to get it on the record for our awareness and understanding. You've mentioned a few things there. If you care to repeat, that's fine, or anything that you wish to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would say that it's important to not lose sight of the fact that since 2015, 132 long-term drinking water advisories have been lifted, that we've got 219 that have also been lifted before they became long-term. So there's been a lot of work to address some of those really crisis situations. And I would say that, yes, some of the results around 7,000 homes, 528 community buildings. But I think what is fundamentally a shift, and one of the, I think, a really important point to make is around the settlement. There are huge trust issues with the government and communities with respect to water, rightfully so after years. And so what does the water settlement actually do? It allows us to, first of all, compensate, $1.5 billion to compensate for those who have been harmed by long-term drinking advisories. We created a $400 million First Nations Economic and Cultural Restoration Fund. There's a commitment to lift the remaining long-term drinking water advisory. We now have a First Nations Advisory Committee that will look at safe drinking water. We've got a commitment to support First Nations and their bylaws with respect to water. $6 billion in forward investment is committed under this settlement. And so that gives that certainty of longevity in terms of the government's commitment. And I think repealing the legislation is also part of what First Nations have been asking for, to replace it with something that has more rigor and respects rights and long-term funding. So I think that that's part of the success. And I would say the final piece around success is around transformation and what the department is doing to kind of get away out of the business of managing this asset by asset, but actually investing into water authorities, water hubs, community, tribal councils that are actually running the water services for communities, and government stepping away from that by providing the funding. I think that's also part of the success, is to really transform the capacity in communities.
Thank you for that. Actually, in that vein, if I could point to one of the recommendations, one of the key recommendations in the report in question. It does relate to, well, I'll just read it. Indigenous Services Canada, this is recommendation 3.61 on page 13, it looks like. Indigenous Services Canada should work with First Nations to proactively identify and address underlying deficiencies in water systems to prevent recurring advisories. So that's about collaboration, working together. Of course, the department did agree. I'm just wondering where you would say that recommendation lies in terms of it unfolding. Where are we?
I think that it unfolds in many situations. It unfolds with rights holders and individual communities in terms of the work that we need to do together to train operators, to manage the O&M, as well as to kind of forward plan around their capital plans and what the community sees in terms of their needs with respect to water. So I think that's one element of partnership. I think it's also about the ongoing prioritization of communities and the department and working very closely with them. But I would say where I think the partnerships will bear fruit is with the upcoming legislation. We have a commitment to co-develop with First Nations partners, and we have started that. We have been working with the AFN for over 3 years. We know what the core issues are around rights, around legislating that right to safe water. We know about funding, long-term needs and sustainability, source water protection. So these are all issues that we are going to co-develop, not just with the AFN, but with water authorities, First Nations-led, tribal councils, individual chiefs. And I think that partnership and that work together allows us to kind of continue this work and show greater results. And I would also say that what the settlement also did is recognize the harm and have an ability to rebuild that trust and partnership, because there are people that were never at the table with us that are now at the table looking to see how we can collaborate. So it's not the challenges remain. I don't want to give the impression that there's not still work to be done, that we will continue to do. But these are some examples of progress.
It is encouraging. Finally, with my last question, recommendation 3.77 on page 15 of the report. Indigenous Services Canada, in consultation with First Nations, should make it a priority to, and my focus is the second bullet point, amend the existing policy and funding formula to provide First Nations with sufficient funding to operate and maintain drinking water infrastructure. What would you say to that recommendation in terms of progress?
So I think for Mr. Chair, how I would answer that is, so as of July 2021, we have updated our formula that we are making process. And when I speak about operations and maintenance, there's a kind of a number of activities. Of course, it's water and wastewater systems, but it's equipment. It's the water mains. It's the plants. It's the sewer mains, booster stations, lift stations. These are all part of what it takes to successfully operate a water treatment plant, but it's also the operator, the salaries, the daily cleaning, the testing, the inspection. So I think that one of the big commitments I would say is that we now have a formula. And I would also note that in addition to being industry standard, it does have consideration for remoteness. It also has an adjustment for inflation that's built into the O&M formula structure to allow for growth. And any sort of new asset that is constructed would also be subject to an update in the formula. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if there are complexities because of a particular system or solution, there's flexibility for us to work with First Nations to increase that funding if and when that is required.
Thank you, Ms. Fox.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I always like to think the "and" is the last point, but members and witnesses are good at adding "ands" as well. So. Turning now to tournant maintenant à Madame Saint-Claude Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yeah, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased that we have the opportunity to have you with us, Ms. Fox, Ms. Hogan, and of course our Auditor General. Very important report, and I'd like to hear your perspective, Madam Auditor General. Your opening statement was quite revealing, in fact, if I allow to quote a part of it, when you said an example that shows that the results are slow in respecting the engagements made, and this, we must not only speak about it, but we have to act. This is vital. What might you add to your observations over the past few years on the fact that you've made recommendations, they were accepted, the plan of action was developed, but none of these actions were actually achieved or implemented fully? Can you add some detail on that, please, Ms. Hogan? The situation saddens me to see that the problem is still yet unresolved. The initial commitment was valid. We were going to remove all long-term water advisories before 2021. I'm always concerned that we're pushing back these deadlines constantly, and the more delays that we encounter, it's another generation of families in these Indigenous communities that will live without access to safe, potable water. Most of us will be leaving this meeting today. We won't even think about it when we go to the drinking fountain or get a glass of water. And some communities, First Nations communities, they can't do that. It's so fundamental to one's daily well-being and to one's health for generations of communities, and we must give follow-through to these actions. I'm always concerned when we miss a deadline or a target date, and we have to serve Indigenous communities throughout Canada. We can't see any more slowdown in accomplishment in here. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. That's useful information, and I think it sets the scene for a series of questions now, which I will probably ask to Indigenous Services Canada. I'll try to be as concise as possible and as clear as possible. This committee has heard, we've made recommendations, we've made interim reports, we've awaited answers from Indigenous Services Canada. I have examples here of some deadlines that were in fact pushed back. And even if we had received some answers, we hadn't yet invited ISG to be here. But in March 22, we didn't get the interim report, or nor the following one. The 30th of April, we didn't receive. We received one letter on the 9th of June, once we had invited you to appear before the committee. Now, as administrators in the government, how can you justify these delays to the many, many reports that were requested by this committee? Well, let me begin by pointing out that we did provide information on the 9th of June to the committee. We addressed the recommendations with our ministerial plan. And I would also mention that we wanted to ensure that we provided you with information which was as complete, comprehensive, and factual as possible. The work we have, in fact, done through the settlement, the water settlement agreement, certain elements were quite important for the committee to know. So with a little bit of a delay or lag in providing you with the information, you got more complete information. So this was the intent, so that as much as possible we could address all of the recommendations and not only pick an example here or there where we had succeeded in meeting the objective. We are always prepared, myself and my team, to come and discuss with you and see what can be done. Okay, my first question is, why was there so many delays? So we could get better quality information. Fine. We'll take a look at that in future rounds of questioning. The first recommendation, and in your letter on page 7, and since the budget 2016, the Government of Canada has committed to invest at least $16 billion plus in order to improve water systems and wastewater systems. We will continue to work in this fashion. This would say that the budget, $375 million in the current budget to improve community infrastructure on reserve. So 40-something of these will be for water systems and wastewater systems. Furthermore, there's some detailed numbers of other amounts for various other projects. Now, if they invested they received approximately $2,600 per project. Do you think that's adequate? Well, you have about 20 seconds to reply, and you can come back in the second round. Thank you, Chair. I'll be as quick as I can. Essentially, what you received in our letter of the 9th of June was expenditures by category. And to this day, today, this has, some of the financing, of course, is staged. It's delivered annually. So if your question is, have First Nations received all the financing that we had committed to on a budget on an annual basis, my answer would be yes. Okay, I'll stop you there. Time is short.
Goes over, I allow others, but there are even limits to my patience. So, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 6 minutes, and I know vous aurez.
And you will have the obvious opportunity to sign up for a second round.
Thank Ms. Hogan for your good words today. I think it really helps to frame this discussion on what it really should be. And I want to thank all my colleagues here, particularly Jamie, for your opening comments. Thanks so much, because it's important that we understand that this is a report on a failure. It's a report on a failure. there was the commitment by the government to end these long-term drinking water advisories by March 31st, 2021. The government's failed to achieve that. That's a fact. And Indigenous communities are left reeling from it. And Ms. Hogan, I really admire your work and your patience in this, and I can only understand your frustration and my frustration with the fact that there's still so many communities, generations of communities, as you've said, that will go without, that have suffered and will continue to go without clean drinking water. And all we're left with is responses of, we're just going to have to wait and more delay. That's unfair for community members. That's not a good answer. That's unfair to people who are waiting right now. It's just not okay. These are real people, relatives of mine, that just don't have clean water. And Ms. Hogan's right. We're all going to leave this committee room, and we're all going to enjoy a glass of water, not knowing where it came from or the kind of privilege that is. And it's unfortunate that that's the reality we're living in, because these communities don't get it. And that frustrates me. I'm frustrated and upset that Indigenous communities have to continue to always wait. If this were Montreal or Toronto, this would be done in a second. Any of our communities, this would be done in an overnight. We'd fix these issues. But because these are Indigenous communities who've been sounding the alarm forever, we're still not acting fast enough. This is an emergency. This isn't something that can wait. We can't hear about these continuous delays. And what I want to achieve in this committee today is firm commitment that we're actually going to do this. It's unfair. It's completely unfair. So my question is, when will these remaining communities, when can they expect to get clean water? Because some of them can't even afford to continue buying water, bottled water. When can they actually make sure that these systems are going to work for them? When, what is the date? Because it's clearly not March 31st, 2021. Ms. Fox.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I think I would say the following. I mean, these are extremely difficult issues for all of us. And as we work with communities and we see the impacts of what long-term drinking water advisories have done to communities and youth and trust, they are real and they are challenging and they are difficult. And I want to absolutely recognize that. And it is an emergency situation, and we do need to act in a way that responds to the emergency situation, which is why at times the department not only looks to a long-term solution, but a short-term solution. And I know that that is not the ideal solution, but at times in order to respond to a crisis that is kind of, so actions are happening every day. There is a commitment to get all 34 remaining long-term drinking advisories lifted. But the commitment can't stop just there, because there are communities right now that don't have a long-term drinking water advisory, but I would say they do not necessarily have a system that is appropriate long-term. Some of their homes are not connected to a water system. I was in Pikangikum last summer and saw firsthand it impacts emergency management in this country. So I think what's important for us is to stay focused on the actions required to lift the remaining advisories, while also staying focused on the long-term investment for the sustainability of the water solution, whatever wastewater or treatment plant. So we have...
Sorry, Ms. Fox, I just have to interrupt. There's limited time. The question was, when can these communities expect to have clean water? You know, there was obviously thinking that went around the date of March 31st, 2021. That's a commitment. This government has a tradition of giving commitment, not just this government, all governments have a tradition of committing to First Nations and then just falling flat. That affects the relationship. When you speak of mistrust, that is the mistrust. The not answering of this question is a mistrust. We need to know when these boil water advisories, when the clean water can actually get to these communities. They want to know when. They don't want to know that we're all committed, because that's a fact. What we want to know is, when will they actually have clean water? And a portion of that, if you can add, perhaps related to the existing other deadlines. You know, my colleague from the block mentioned other existing missing deadlines. There's a tradition of not being held accountable for when you should be doing these things. Ms. Hogan has been very clear about that. She's concerned, our Auditor General, that we're going to continue to say these things and we're going to continue to lie. When are we actually going to do this?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would say that
Just one second. Sorry, did I? Could you just retract that word, please, or just
gonna say
restate
point
that
of order
question?
on that.
Sure, I can restate
We
it.
do need to adhere to parliamentary language in this committee room as well
Sure.
as the House.
When we can make a commitment to long-term drinking water by March 31st, 2021, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit perceive that as a lie when we don't do it. When can we actually inform them of the truth and when they can expect clean water? That's what we're talking about here.
So for the long-term drinking water advisories, Mr. Chair, that exist now, we've got 45% of those that are anticipated to be lifted by the end of this calendar year, December 2022. And we have some of them where no date has been set yet as a result of the ongoing work towards the long-term solution. And so we will continue to work through both the construction, the design, the testing. I would say that 88% of those remaining are in either the construction or the kind of the final completion stage of the advisories that remain. Only a few are in that first kind of feasibility or design stage, so 88%. But I cannot give you today a date on every single one because we're still working with the communities to determine the final date lift. And I would also say that at the end of the day, it is a community that decides on the lift, not the government.
Thank you very much. I know this issue does hit communities and some individuals very close, but I would ask that we maintain decorum in this committee as we try to in the House as well. Turning now to Mr. Duncan, beginning the second round, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. And there's a lot of common themes over my time in the last couple of months on public accounts, and for this item being a key priority of the Government of Canada, as alluded to in the reports and the government's response, it is very frustrating. I'll never malign anybody's intent. I believe everybody around the table here, committee, department officials, I don't mean they mean well and want to do well. Where I question the government's ability is the management and leadership to actually affect the change to make the result happen. And as Mr. Schmale was alluding to in his opening as well, we're seeing time and time again in public accounts, spending money is not a result. Saying we're investing X number of millions of dollars is not an actual result. And what we're seeing through the Auditor General, what we're seeing through the PBO, is that we're actually spending more money and getting less results, getting less value for money. And it speaks to the system. And I've given the government a lot of frustration. A repeated line that I've used is an A for an announcement and an F for follow through on this. And I just want to give an example of the frustration, the broken cycle or system I find ourselves in this report and the follow-up of this. In the report a year and a half ago, it was talked about the inadequacy and the lack of regulatory regime when it comes to drinking water systems and in the relationship that the department has with First Nations communities. And it was determined through consultation that the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act was to be repealed by March 31st, 2022. We're 3 months past the deadline. Deputy Minister Fox, can you give me the bill number that's in Parliament right now to repeal this?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the bill number, but it's part of the Budget Implementation Act.
The replacement act of where it goes, because again, it's going to have to be a specific piece of legislation of how it goes to the replacement. We're months behind on this. When it comes to the replacement being introduced by the end of the year, are you confident we're going to be able to meet that date based on what I think we've been hearing as well, is that it might be another deadline missed on this?
In terms of our intention to table before December 31st, I think that one of the elements that will help us achieve our target is the fact that we actually started the consultation process 3 years ago. We started it with the AFN, and so the beginning of the work to try to draft a replacement legislation has begun through that exercise. And I think that's important because even if the time frame is short, the work that we've done in the lead up will allow us to table legislation that will be co-developed and will address issues of rights, funding, source water protection, and other key issues from our partners.
So can you confirm that you expect the bill to be tabled by December 31st in Parliament?
In our settlement agreement, that we indicated that we would make best efforts to table in the fall.
And I respect that. And I think the frustration where I'm going with this is we're still lacking the assurance. A lot of times we're seeing these delayed in terms of how it's going. And again, I understand the intent and the well-being and the effort for it. But again, we're constantly missing these deadlines of how they're set up and where we want to go. And I'll say when it's introduced, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's enacted. It's got to go through the parliamentary process and making sure that we're getting this right. And it just speaks again to the frustration of where here we are a year and a half from quite a damning report, and we're still having not these we're having dates and intent there, but not an actual follow through on meeting these deadlines. Ms. Hogan, to you, based on just what you've been hearing maybe today, I know you haven't done a specific audit follow-up from your initial report. Are you getting a better confidence that the department and officials and the government are changing the status quo, changing some of those fundamental problems? Are we actually seeing results a year and a half in, or are you still just hearing an intent, follow through, a well-meaning approach to this? Are you fundamentally seeing the change that you think is necessary to change the structure of the system that you deem to be broken?
So, Mr. Chair, that's really a very difficult question to answer. As the member rightfully noted, I have not looked at the new funding formula to ensure that it addresses all the items we would hope that it had been updated to look at. And when it comes to an act and legislative framework, it is more than just an act that needed. There was an act put in place in 2013, but what was missing was the regulations, which is really the way to operationalize that. And so all of that has to be thought through. So if all of those are steps and actions that have been taken, then I do believe they are steps in the right direction. But I do agree with the member that just making commitments doesn't necessarily result in results, and it's really whether those actions will have concrete impact on First Nations communities that will be the measure of success.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Turning now to Mr. Dong, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Deputy Fox, we've been hearing a lot of frustrations on, I think, the focal point, the timeline, and why some of these, why are the overall water advisory is still there. And I hear my honorable colleagues talking about that government spend a lot of time on making commitments, making announcements, but not very good at following through. But I actually think it's the opposite. I think we have not communicated well enough to the public the latest stage of long-term water advisories. Because when I knock on doors, I get questions from constituents, and they are very frustrated, and they see this on the news. But when I tell them the latest update on how many has been identified, short-term, as you said, and how many they were actually lifted in the last 6.5 years, they have no idea. And they're actually, they actually approve that these things are happening. So let me just go back a little bit. I looked around. I couldn't find when was the first time the government started issuing long-term water advisories. Do you have any idea how long ago was that? I know this is an ancient question.
I would have to check. I don't
Okay.
have it offhand, sorry.
But 6.5 years ago, how many long-term water advisories were there?
So there was, Mr. Chair, there was 105 long-term drinking advisories when we started this work back in 2015. 105. Yeah.
And how many has been lifted in the 6.5 years?
132.
That doesn't make sense. You discover 100, you start with 105 and then you lift that. Why is that?
I can explain that because if there is an issue with a water advisory in a community, the first step is that it goes to a short-term drinking water advisory in the hopes that we resolve that. And if it's not resolved within a 12-month period, it becomes a long-term drinking water advisory. But I would say that it's not just about doing the work to stop to lift the long-term drinking water advisory, because if you ignore the balance of the water systems, they will find their way into that. So it's about obviously the work to lift them, but also the sustainability of the water infrastructure to avoid systems from going to short-term and then eventually long-term.
Do you have a number for short-term water advisory 6.5 years ago?
The number of short-term, 6.5 years ago,
November
I don't.
2015. You can
I
submit
know
this
that
later
we've
on.
lifted 219 since then.
2019 or since then. Okay. So, I hear a lot of questions about, actually a lot of comments about we got to get this done ASAP, and I believe everybody around in this room wants this to be lifted ASAP. But can you talk about the complexity, in itself, because you got to work with the local indigenous community, make sure all their concerns are met, and we got to deal with this problem once for all, right? So there's a lot of, I hear that there's a lot of one-time funding to deal with infrastructure. Can you speak a little bit about that and give me about 1 minute left? I have one more question on this. Yeah, leave me with 1 minute.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think I would say that the complexities are enormous, and they are very different depending on what community that you're working in. So it could be about where the community is located in terms of the ability to even construct a long-term facility on the type of land that may be present in the community, because I know that that has been a challenge. There's a challenge around sometimes the remoteness of some of these communities where building seasons are shortened by the fact that they're in the north or in rural parts of the country. There is, once built, at times there are capacity challenges in community in order to make sure that trained operators have the right supports in place to maintain these systems. There is.
Sorry. And just a side question, you said that about a half of the remaining advisories is still to be determined when in terms of timeline, right? When do you think we're going to have a better idea of when it's going to be lifted? The 17 of them.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question we ask ourselves a lot. And I may turn to Nelson just to talk a little bit about our work with the communities. But you are correct that 45% we are expected to be lifted by December, and some in June and July.
Okay, so we're not expecting this to be lifted, say, next year, right?
We are projecting at least one for next year, but we want to work with the others to try to see what can be done.
Okay, so if you have a better idea, you can submit later. Last question.
No. I'm afraid your time. Sorry, your time is up.
My bad.
Yes. Maintenant, on retourne à Madame Saint-Claude Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais d'abord commencer par.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by endorsing the comments made by my colleague from the NDP that these delays have become standardized. Common for these departments. Particularly, it builds a sense of lack of confidence of these communities with the federal government. I'd like to come back. There was a few comments in the final report. It says that for 2026, you decided to give us an interim report in March of 2022, and you have a letter on the 9th of June. Now, we were supposed to get some of the results of these deadlines and what concrete results, and nothing in the letter appears to give any substance to those questions. So perhaps you can give us a few more details. But how is it that even when we ask for follow-through updates, more information, not only is there delays, we're not even getting the answers to the questions that Public Accounts Committee has requested. So some clarification on that, Ms. Fox? Well, I would say, Mr. Chair, the department is challenged by the transparency of the results. We have a public website, and we have, in fact, posted all the investments, all the commitments, all the boil water advisories that exist, the condition or stage at which these are, and try to be as much transparency as possible. We tried to present that in our report, but if there are elements that are missing, we'd be very happy to provide a follow-up and give you more information. Okay. What have you done over the course of the last year, since 1921, when we presented that recommendation report? What kind of deadlines and timelines did you set for infrastructure projects, even unfortunately on the website we get some numbers, but the numbers are not correlated with the results. So what have you done over the past year? We've worked diligently on the infrastructure plans, which are not necessarily all involving water systems or wastewater systems. We have to tailor-make each plan, each action plan for the specific community or collectivity. There's not all of the information on our website, but particularly in regards to infrastructure projects of various types. We can give you the results in terms of health state, number of housing starts and completions. This information is brought to date on a rather regular basis.
Over to you, sir.
2 minutes.
And I think that, first of all, I want to thank my colleagues for providing good answers. I think that helped to remedy some of my questions, particularly the comments from the block. Related to the mistrust aspect, I want to just make sure on the record that we have a full understanding that when Indigenous communities bring these concerns forward, just like I am, it's met with almost identical, the exact same response across the board. You know, Canadians watching this, all you have to do is rewind for my last round of questioning to see how most Indigenous people, when they bring up their frustration, are treated. And so I'll leave it at that. But now to the questions at hand.
Point of order,
Timelines
Chair.
are really important.
Point of order. Yes. None of us doubt the passion of the member, and he certainly has added a great deal to the committee. That is for certain. Mm-hmm. But to be clear, one cannot call a witness a liar in a committee meeting.
I didn't say that. You can go back, Peter. You can see it. I didn't say that.
That's how I took it, and the chair obviously called it out as well. So
I didn't say that. That's not on the record.
If that wasn't your intent, fine. Clearly there was something off.
You're intending to say that to me now.
Clearly
you're trying to paint that picture
in terms of how you delivered it. So let's just be clear on that. But
I want you to be clear because it's important that the record show it's very, very clear. I didn't say that.
Okay, so that's obviously something was off if the chair himself called it out.
John never said that. He never said I called anyone a liar.
Let
me use parliamentary language.
So there was a ping, Mr. Desjardins, that you were, if not over the line, you were very close to it. And I understand your frustration, and you've always conducted yourself in this committee with both passion and a very good natured. And I hope that I believe that will continue. But just even throwing the word lie out there it's not parliamentary language, and your correction on that was appreciated. And I would ask that you would just maintain the decorum you always have, and we would continue with the questions. And look, I know everyone around this committee room is seized with this issue. I think Canadians across the country think it is outrageous, as you do. We might lack the personal experience that I think you embody and bring to this table, and the fact we have the Deputy Minister here answering questions, I think, is a testament to the government's commitment to this on behalf of all Canadians. So I just would ask you don't impute motive to the Deputy Minister, and you conduct yourself as you always have. And I thought we'd moved off from that last point, and I hope we continue to do that.
Well, I think in order to preserve my time and be able to have a response, I think is fair. And so to my response to you, Honourable Chair, is the fact that the Auditor General sitting right here. We could talk about GBA Plus. This is one of those areas that parliamentarians actually have to learn something about. There has to be some understanding about the systemic barriers that are facing Indigenous people in this place, and being able to simply just address the reality that when you have a commitment from December 21st to First Nations people who could die from not having clean water, you find some language to interpret that then.
Fair enough.
Yeah. You understand what I'm trying to say?
No, I do, and that's why I'm doing everything I can to give you a lot of latitude, because I can understand how when the government of all stripes makes commitments and doesn't fulfill it, how that is perceived from First Nation communities as well as Canadians across the country. So I'm endeavoring to give you as much latitude as I can, but I do need to maintain parliamentary language at the committee, and I think you're trying to do that while expressing frustration. I just ask that you continue to do that. I'm going to turn back the clock because I think we're kind of getting off the point, and you have another minute and 48 seconds. So back to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks again to my colleagues for your patience on this. It's something that I hope you can continue to learn more about and understand more about, and the effects Indigenous communities this has. It's not easy, not nearly as easy it is for for us here to talk about this as it is for Indigenous people to experience this. And I'm using far greater language than they will. Trust me on that. Second, to the point that I'm trying to make here
As in, you're
is
being
how do we
far
make
more
sure...
diplomatic than they would be.
Exactly, far more
No,
diplomatic.
that's exactly it. And that way, I appreciate that.
Yeah, far more diplomatic. And so to my questioning now, it's on dates and timelines. You mentioned in your former statement, after I had mentioned the failure to the department to reach the government's commitment on timeline, that it's actually the First Nations communities that define the timeline. Then why ever make a commitment to begin with?
Thank you. And maybe I would just start my answer just by saying that I raised the point around sort of the difficulty and the sensitivity around water issues, and it's not unique to water. Working with First Nations community when it comes to house fires or emergency management, fire, flooding, these are extremely challenging situations. And we do have people, myself included, who go on the ground and try to be that support. But absolutely appreciate the frustration of the committee with respect to this work. And that is kind of what drives our resolve, is kind of the impact on people. And I would just note to the chair that the department is taking this, and I know, actions speak louder than any commitments that can be made, but there is action there. There's also an understanding of the mental health impacts that this has on communities. And so rebuilding that trust, investing into mental health specific to water impacts are other things that the department takes very seriously and tries to work with partners. When it comes to the lift, and I say this with, this is about a partnership. And nobody can decide to lift unless they have certainty that they have government funding, government support. So I'm not suggesting that the lift is entirely the choice of a First Nations Band and Council in the context of, if they wouldn't have the funding, how could they make that choice? So what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, and I think this is important, government can't dictate when someone lifts, because if a community does not feel that the conditions are in place to lift, they should not and will not lift. And that is important in the context of, we have to ensure that they have trust in the partnership, trust in the longevity of the commitment, and trust that they've got the capacity and operations in place to lift their advisory. So I really want to clarify that.
So part of the second round, turning to Mr. Patzer, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks everyone for being here. Just kind of getting back to the issue of short-term advisories, were there some that are more likely than others to become long-term advisories?
Yeah, there are some that have higher risk factors, and so as we look at a short term, is it going to be, is it short term because it's going to be something more significant, like a complete replacement of a water treatment plant? Then obviously that we take action accordingly. But I would say that all of them have risk, and that's as a result of kind of falling into the category of short term, but some would be higher risk than others.
Okay. And then how many short-term advisories, I guess maybe even if you just have like a percentage, but if you have the total number, that'd be great. But how many short-term advisories that are lifted are put back on again? Like how often are they recurring, these short-term advisories?
Yeah, we'll have to, we don't have the specific numbers, but we could get that to the committee for sure.
Yeah, I think that'd be very helpful for sure if you could
Yeah.
follow up with that.
Okay.
I guess moving on to another issue then would be just on training. So, I mean, you referenced one First Nation, for example, only had one operator. I've worked in jobs previously where I was working on reserve and saw the same experience at other First Nations as well, where then there's only one guy operating as well. What is being done to, I guess, attract and get more people from the local communities engaged and trained in these jobs to make sure that there's not just one person, or that there is a contingency plan for retirements or somebody moving on, et cetera?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I think what I would say is that we are investing. We've got a program called the Circuit Rider Training Program, which is essentially a $20 million per year program to fund water operators. We have, particular outreach to kind of youth in communities or those members of communities that may want to take this on. I think that there's a lot of considerations, though. It's about training. It's about ensuring the right salary dollars so that water operators, once trained, don't depart and go work for a bigger utility. And so that's always a risk factor. It's also about investing into kind of the hubs that can be a bit of a network for those that are working in community. So they've got sort of mentorship or sort of expertise that they can go to troubleshoot and seek additional supports. And I think that the Atlantic Water Authority, which will essentially provide water supports to 17, at a minimum, 17 First Nations in the Atlantic Canada context, they will have a bit, through the transformation exercise and funding from the department, they will be able to kind of train and place and do kind of regular continuous training, not just to go into new technologies when it comes to water. So I think that it's a complex issue, and I think that depending on the health of the community, that's also, a considerations. We've talked to chiefs to say, we've got more money on the table to perhaps train more operators, but at times their communities are facing significant, intergenerational trauma or addictions issues, and they're having a hard time mobilizing that workforce. So it's about all of the supports and not just kind of the funding for the water operators. It's about mental health, it's about education, and it's about that continuous support system through various services.
Thank you. And then to Mrs. Hogan, you had identified, the workforce in your report. I'm just wondering if you have any further comments on just the workforce side of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, I can't speak to any of the progress since our report. What I can tell you about was some of the findings that we found in the report, which covered a period that ended in November of 2020. At that time, we noted that 26% of the public water systems lacked trained and certified operators, and approximately 56% actually lacked backup operators. And so the need to really build that capacity is essential to help support First Nations communities going forward. I also want to highlight that there's only about 2/3 of the homes that are on public systems. And so really having that knowledge within a community will just help that community going forward. If you do want a bit of information about the circuit training program, I think we actually looked at it in another audit, and perhaps Mr. Wheeler could add some thoughts if members are concerned and would like to hear about that.
You have 14 seconds.
Yeah, if you can say something in 15 seconds, Mr. Wheeler, yeah.
Mr. Chair, yes, from an historical perspective, we saw good things in the Circuit Rider program. Over the years, it was making an appreciable impact on improving capacity in First Nations. But as the auditor referred to, a lot more needs to be done to bring First Nations up to the same level as other communities vis-a-vis capacity.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And let me just say that I am very appreciative of the tone and the questions that we're hearing at this meeting, because indeed, as my colleague Mr. Duncan likes to say, if it was just a matter of throwing money at the problem, we could solve it. If it was just a matter of setting target dates, then I think we'd have something to aim at, and we could get there. But it's a lot more complex than that. So I would like to hear the Deputy Minister on what are some of those complexities that we're seeing, especially with small communities that sometimes only have a few hundred people. What is the government doing to support these communities in developing expertise and capacity in order to run their waste and wastewater systems? And then, Chair, I will give the remainder of my time to my good colleague, Mr. Dong.
Mr. Chair, I think I would say overall, I think the complexities around remoteness, around building seasons, around complexities of programs, around existing infrastructure in communities that sort of impact the water system. I think sort of from a high level perspective, those are kind of some of the key impacts. I think that in a kind of post-COVID pandemic situation, we're in a different place where we've got communities that were shut down during COVID for the protection of their members, and that has kind of brought some different complexities in terms of delays or cost overruns, or even the measures that needed to take place to have contractors kind of in and out of community in a time of a global pandemic. So that's another complexity that's come into play. I would say that when I look down the list of every single water advisory that is left. And I kind of see sort of the, sometimes it's a trucking issue, sometimes it's a sewer plant issue, sometimes it's a flooding or fire that has impacted the water treatment plant. And I would say that, right now we've got a huge issue with labor availability and even some of the parts and requirements for construction. So I think I would say there are a number of complexities involved, and that's why I think the action plan that goes community by community, that paints out the realities of that community, the long-term goal, what are some of the potential short-term fixes, and then how can we sort of move them to final completion, I think is really important and part of the government's action plan.
Thank you. Mr. Dong, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Brenda for giving me that time so I get to ask my last question. Deputy, we heard the Auditor General criticize on the funding formula hasn't been updated like forever. And do you have any institutional memory to when the funding formula was first started and how long it hasn't been, how many years it hasn't been updated?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the Auditor General mentioned that it was a 30-year formula. And so we did update it in July of 2021 as one of the actions and the recommendations. And I think that what we tried to do is look at industry standard in order to change the formula. We looked at the asset costs, the different sort of equipment that are part of the asset, the remoteness factor, as well as adjustments for inflation. So we hope that these changes will bring that certainty and predictability of funding. We also moved from 80% coverage of O&M to 100% coverage of O&M. And I think right now we're at 4 times the level of funding than we were previously. So it is, and I think that perhaps in the, the early years in terms of the investment in the capital, without matching that with the investment in the O&M may have had an impact on how the sustainability of the systems progressed. And I think that this is actually a really important initiative in order to go to 100% and change that formula.
Yeah, absolutely. Operation and maintenance is very important for long-term sustainability. You also talked about we have invested $5.6 billion and also $1.5 billion in settlement and also restoration fund. Are all these funding or money part of the formula, or these are additional?
Very brief answer, please.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Only a part of those resources are related to operations and maintenance. Okay. It is a blend of both capital, construction, maintenance, and capacity resources.
Can you submit to the committee?
No, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you right there.
Oh, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
All right, that's
and what's in the formula?
A request. Turning now to Mr. Schmale, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to pick up on the conversation Eric and Blake were having, and I recognize a lot of these questions should be going to the minister, but fortunately for us, you're here, but unfortunately for you at the same time. Let's continue the conversation regarding the PBO report, the Auditor General report, and where we're at now. So we have an extraordinary amount of money being spent. We have targets continually not met. And I recognize this has been over 150 years. I do recognize there's been a series of failures along the way. We have strategies, we have action plans, but no implementation. I think there's anyone in this room, I think, has a company in their riding that could make drinking water clean. I know I do. What is going on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would note that the strategies are yielding progress. I think we are seeing progress, and we are seeing that by 132 lifts. We're seeing that by the connections to systems that weren't there previously. But I think it's important that, because we do get a lot of suggestions from the department, like my company could go in and do all of the country for X amount of dollars. But I think it is important to recognize that First Nations community leadership have to decide what systems work for them, They then have to rely on government, of course, for funding and supports. But I think it is about the solution coming from the First Nations leadership in order to determine what type of wastewater system that they would like for their community.
Is the department helping with those decisions, though?
Absolutely, we work in partnership. Absolutely, yes.
So the government would have a kind of a preferred list of suppliers and
well, you know what, we're actually, one of the things that we're talking to the AFN about is actually maybe a list not coming from government, right? Because, I mean, it is a bit odd for us to say you should use the following 10 people if, you know, if you look at infrastructure at large, like if you know, we want to hire someone to do a home project, there's like the Better Business Bureau, or there's some sort of list that is kind of a credible, reliable source. That is something that we're talking to First Nations leadership about, is kind of the production of that, because bad actors and bad contractors are in place. I've seen it happen in
Absolutely.
communities.
I'm not saying that. There must be, you know, I have the figure here. The government procures billions of dollars every single year. So, okay. So we have the PBO report that is talking about spending, you know, again, we're spending more. The department in ISK, which is supposed to be temporary, it's in your departmental plan. I know you know this. It's a temporary department, yet it's growing. But we keep having report after report of these collapses in fixing an issue that, to what has been pointed out at this committee, had it happened in any single community, would have been fixed by now, off reserve. So again, there must be something in the department that is blocking this progress. I know Indigenous communities want their own say. I do recognize that. It's got to be bottom up, not top down. Where is this delay? Could we be using more collaboration where possible with non-Indigenous communities where they have a municipal water system that can be connected? There's got to be a blockage somewhere, because this would be fixed anywhere else.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what I would say is I don't think the blockage is within the department. I think that people work in this department because they want to see change. And actually, there are a number of people committed to that. I think in terms of, you're right, we are sort of no longer going to exist when we transform services. But I think the reason for the growth is you can actually transfer something that is not transferable in the context of sustainability. So if you, if we need to, scale up a little bit to support the Atlantic Water Authority for a few years, transfer something that is transferable, and then step away from it. I think that's why you're seeing perhaps a bit of growth into the department. But in terms of like, how could we do this better? Of course, we have to modernize how we do infrastructure. And part of it perhaps has to be less about asset by asset management and more about communities have their infrastructure priorities, and there's kind of funding that goes through, and they make decisions about what's best for their communities with perhaps less program by program conversations with us, right? Because that can be a burden between ourselves, other departments that do any type of infrastructure on reserve. So I think to the question about how could we do this better, I think there are modernization efforts on infrastructure that I think we're learning about that we can do better. I think that the capital investments are key, and I think the PBO noted that they are there. And I think that it's not just about the kind of hard infrastructure, but it's also about the investments into environmental public health officers and other health, because they test water. And I think all of that under a new legislative framework that could have regulations and standards around water protection and rights to clean water.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. So to the Deputy Minister, I think it's normal when you take on any challenge that you get the easy wins first, so you can have the greatest impact by tackling the more straightforward problems. Is there anything unique about the remaining 34 long-term drinking water advisories? Do these communities have any shared characteristics that have made them more challenging to resolve?
That's a very, Mr. Chair, I think that's a very good question. I think that I would say that indeed you try to make progress as quickly as you can. And I think that when, a water treatment plant existed or was relatively new. It was, further investment can just enhance the service. But I think that what is common to some of the communities that are remaining is around remoteness. It is around sort of shortened construction season. It is sometimes around the complexities of kind of where we're building, and and I think that we definitely try to kind of do lessons learned, right, as we work with one community, and maybe one solution can be shared. And I think that's why these forums with tribal councils and the AFN can really kind of bring people together. But yes, there are definitely common themes throughout those that are harder to lift. And in fairness, I think some had such mistrust of government that through the water settlement, conversations that were not occurring are now occurring. And that allows us to make progress in some of those communities as well.
Okay, that's great. Now, with respect to the Mohawk of the Bay of Quinte, as of March 15th of this year, a retroactive long-term DWA was issued for the Public Works Garage. Could you explain what a retroactive DWA is?
Maybe I'll turn to.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So retroactive long-term drinking water advisory is one where an assessment was done after the fact, and the determination that water advisory has been in place for some time. So it's the scheduling of the test and the determination of when that water issue began.
So it wasn't identified earlier, but so when the actual testing happens, you think, okay, so this has probably existed for a couple of years or something? Like, how would you determine when the failure had occurred?
So it's like a measured determination. So I would say Mohawk's Bay of Quinte saw, I think, 3 to 4 lifts in the last 4 months. And so this is the last remaining lift in place. So I think it's a determination not only of time, but also sequencing with other water systems or other water producing facilities in the community.
Okay. So back to the Deputy Minister, is there stable funding for the Circuit Rider Training Program, and like how many workers are there in the program?
So I think the stable funding is about 20 million per year, and we could get the numbers of exactly how many. Maybe Nelson, I'll turn to you.
So the Circuit Rider Training Program is a grants and contributions. It's a resource that is paid directly to this organization. So they have their own stable of employees. So that is managed wholly on their part. As the Deputy Minister mentioned, the commitment for funding is there, and that was a core component of the operations and maintenance review to ensure that operations was stabilized, and the programs like the Circuit Rider Training Program, but also other training programs that support youth training, the provision of training for women in order to modernize the operational workspace. Those were all core components of the operation funding that was highlighted by the Auditor General some time ago.
Okay, and actually getting back to these last few remaining ones that are particularly challenging, with many First Nation communities having a smaller population, sometimes just a few hundred, and what is the government doing to support those communities to develop the expertise and capacity and community to run their water and waste systems? Like, what is the plan to adjust these challenges? Like, yes, maybe that circuit program is part of it, but.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, like in the 29 communities that are still impacted by long-term drinking water advisories, like we've got data on each community and whether they fall under kind of 0 to 100 people, and then kind of 200 to 500 to determine sort of the scale and scope of the community. But I think that working with the First Nations chief and the council, we identify sort of what are the needs and how we could support them, in the Circuit Rider Training Program is an excellent way that we can support them. But also the additional funding through O&M allows them also to provide salary dollars that are competitive in the context of water operators, and that's another way to attract and retain.
Okay, great.
Ms. Bradford, do you have the time for either a quick comment or the briefest question with the brief answer?
Brief question for the Auditor General. So you mentioned in your report that the department presented the committee with a detailed action plan that addressed our recommendations. Many of the milestones that the department had set have passed. So by that, do you mean that the deadline has passed or that the situations have been resolved? I found that a confusing statement.
I meant that the deadline had passed and that those would be certain actions that you should ask the Deputy Minister to the Department about progress against.
Follow up on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and that will have to wait for another round, Ms. Bradford. Maintenant, Madame Sinclair Desgagnés, vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous
Merci,
plaît.
Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais revenir aussi sur ma dernière.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to get back to my last question. I was asking, while the recommendations were accepted by the letter of the 9th of June, unfortunately, didn't have what we were expecting, the timeline, results, etc. And I closed my turn questions. What had occurred last year? What got accomplished? Now I'll change orientation a little bit. What do you expect to get done in the next 6 months? I mean, expectations are high. I know that there has been a settlement agreement for access to potable water, and a bill will be introduced before March 2022, apparently. And Ms. Fox, that's in 6 months' time, November, October. Will the deadlines be met, or do you think that you'll overrun on the time, or do you think you'll be able to meet them? Well, thank you very much, Chair. By way of this agreement, we did note that we are going to table a bill before the 31st of December, that to the best of our abilities, we don't control all the factors, and we don't know what we'll give with the parliamentary calendar itself. So not everything is under our control. However, it's very important that we do table this bill. I'm quite confident because we've already begun consultations. We've begun the project. The 2013 project had absolutely no effect, and the consequences were as if we had not consulted at all. So if this bill will be very important. And we don't have much time, but we have already started the process. I mean, the federal government could decide to propose a bill, table a bill, in order that we do meet that. But if our partners are unhappy with the results or uncomfortable with the results and are prepared to put in a bit more time to get it right, I can accept that. But we do intend to table this bill before the end of the calendar year. But we have to work with our partners. Thank you. Time has expired.
Please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think this is our last round. Is that correct?
If there's will, it will be, yes.
Okay,
I'm
I
going
see.
to check back with everyone.
Okay, sure. Thanks. So you mentioned the consultation process. And so I want to touch on that. And I've worked in this field for half a decade, working with First Nations, Métis communities in the West for a very long time. It's how I know some of my colleagues here, which is fantastic. So I know some of you know very well the issues that are present to Indigenous communities. Particular amongst them is consultation. You mentioned AFN. I'm sure you're aware by way of correspondence, tons and tons of correspondence that comes to your office and likely other MPs as well, or my office at the very least, related to consultation and what the government or what some nations perceive as the ignoring of requests for consultation. And I want to speak to one directly that is in Northern Alberta, Treaty 8, the Confederacy of Treaty 8. The Treaty 8 chiefs have a Grand Chief named Art Noski. Art Noski's communicated to me his overt frustration with his inability to contact persons within the department in particular related to legislation, bills, information that he feels pertinent to the operations of Treaty 8, particularly around their treaty rights. He feels as though those treaty rights have been largely ignored. In relation to this bill, has Treaty 8 Confederacy, or the Treaty 8, has Treaty 8 been consulted?
I think, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think I would start by saying that absolutely we know that we have to go and consult beyond the AFN. Many rights holders have told us that, no one speaks for them other than themselves. And so I would say absolutely. And I think that our consultation will be broader than just rights holders and Indigenous political organization, either national or regional, that we will go to water experts and tribal councils that are doing a lot of this work. I think when it comes to Treaty 8, I would say that I am familiar with, not only through the correspondence, but in our discussions with them around health legislation, they have been very clear that their treaty right to health has to be part of that dialogue. And in the context of this work, we will absolutely work with Treaty 8 and other treaty across the country. I don't know if they've been engaged at this point yet. Yes?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I would say that as the deputy mentioned, the pre-consultation on this has begun for 3 years. That is done with the AFN, including other rights holders. I think it's paramount to recognize the space of right holders, but also the treaty right. I think post-repeal, that's when we'll begin in earnest in terms of the legislation of the new drafting. That'll be done in concert with the AFN, with rights holders, with tribal councils, with organizations who have voices in this space, which of course would include treaty organizations and treaties in the Alberta context.
And thank you very much, Mr. Barbosa. Turning now to Mr. Duncan, I believe you're splitting your time, and you and your colleague have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just want to speak a little bit about statistics and the analysis. Perhaps the right word is, I hate using the word data and stats when we're dealing with something so personal. So the context of the situations we're in, and this is a bit of a high-level question, but we know the dates of short-term and long-term when they come into effect and when they're removed. But one of the things I find lacking in the information we have, and I think Mr. Patzer alluded to this, about the context of how these boil water advisories or drinking water advisories come into effect. Is it a repetition of communities that are going through it repeatedly? Is it aging community? Is it water operators not available to manage a good infrastructure system? Do you keep statistics? We know the number that are outstanding, and I'll agree with you that it's a bit depressing. The work is never going to be done in the sense of where, when you go down to zero drinking, drinking water advisories, that your work is done. It's keeping communities from going into those as well. But do you keep statistics at a breakdown of ones that are in effect? Is it because of a lack of water operators? Is it a lack of infrastructure? Is it a combination of both? And then also the repetitiveness of if it's a community that's going this for the 4th time or the 5th time. Do you keep that kind of data to understand these ones that are getting up to this level, how you have that? It's a bit of a reflection point, but just seeing if that's something the department does do, and if not, is that something for us to understand the context? Where are the repeated challenges coming from? Are they new or are they outstanding? And I'll leave it at that and then pass it over to Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you. I think I would say that we do have some statistics and data from what you've outlined, in particular, sort of why some of them would be in effect in either short-term or long-term. So is it an infrastructure gap? Is it an operations gap? So I think there's data around that. We also have quite a bit of data through we have quite a big regional footprint across the country. So our regional offices working with communities would know sort of, whether or not it's a community that has had many short-term, or so we could come back to you with a bit more of a breakdown if that's helpful for the committee.
And I think it would just be helpful in that regard too, just to understand the repetition of a problem or the type of problem that's there in terms of how we do that. So I appreciate the time, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Bragdon. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to you, Ms. Fox. Thanks for your time today. And I know this is a challenge that we're all taking on, and everyone around this room agrees the urgency of this matter. And that's what I want to pick up on here. I think the frustration that Canadians are having from coast to coast, and this goes beyond any particular government of whatever stripe. This has been a situation that was neglected for far too long through all kinds of governments. And as Mr. Desjardins pointed out, that neglect and that lack of adequate response to that crisis and this ongoing crisis is extremely frustrating for Canadians from coast to coast. In my region, I hear about it. Why can't, in Canada, with the kind of water reserves we have, we not just get this fixed. And I know that seems very simplistic in a very complex circumstance, but I think Canadians want to hear assurances now, not in 2023 or 2024, or, oh yeah, we're going to set another deadline, make another announcement. They want to know that the government is going to respond with the urgency that this situation requires. And that means when there's a national emergency, they can move amazing amounts of things in a hurry and get things done when they choose to make that a priority. Why can't this government make this an absolute priority? And if they have to borrow from other departments, bring resources, I'm talking about human resources because it doesn't look like it's a funding issue. It looks like we've got to get the right people in place. So can you speak to that, Ms. Fox, as to what is the government doing to show that this is an absolute number one priority? It needs to be. Canadians are demanding it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would agree that why are we where we're at because of decades and decades of underfunding and neglect. And so now we find ourselves trying to address very concerning situations. And I think that you're also absolutely right that there is a push from all Canadians to see an urgency to this matter. I think that the government, through several budget cycles, has committed funding. And I think that you are correct that it's a hard conversation to have with Canadians in the context of why can't we do this right away and what can you do more? And what we've tried to do over the last few years is what is that more? It's O&M, it's funding, but the reality is if I were to say tomorrow, let's hire 700 more people to go and work and fix all of them, the materials may not be there, the building season may be 3 months, so it has to be spread over a couple of years. Like there are a lot of realities on the ground that make these issues more challenging. It doesn't take away the urgency or the emergency to deal with them. And in fact, at times we have to put in place shorter term measures to kind of bridge that gap between that longer term solution.
Thank you very much.
And I think that's part of the
much.
challenge.
Turning now to Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. There are 12 water and wastewater hubs supporting 86 First Nations in Ontario. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on the hub model and if it is working.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the hub model does work because it provides an integrated set of expertise that can then support individual communities. And so the investments into the hub, in addition to investments into communities directly, act as a direct line of support. It acts as a direct line of training. It acts as a direct line of solutions orientation and trying to bring people together towards different issues that surface in water plants in multiple communities, because there are sometimes, especially in the Northern Ontario context, where having that hub, that support system for the community that's more 24/7 than just relying on their own individual community members, can allow for quick response, can allow for access to contractors. And so I think the hub model is just like an extra support system for chiefs and band council, that when there's something off, they have somewhere to go to get that additional support that the community may need. And for us, it also allows us to develop that capacity and that expertise to allow for better governance, for better training, and for better results. So we feel it's a good sort of investment in capacity building, and then chiefs feel supported by the hubs that operate and support their communities.
Are there any plans to expand that across Canada?
Yeah.
Since it's going so well in Ontario?
It's a great question, because when we look at our transformation exercises across the country, what works in one part of the country may not necessarily work in all parts of the country. But through regional pilots or regional models, you can sort of get best practices. And I think what we're seeing emerging out of the Atlantic Water Authority is this kind of hub and beyond, right, where they're really going to take control over water services for those communities that want to work through the authority. And so it is, the hubs are having an impact in terms of the ability to transform the service. Do we want to look at sort of hubs across the country? Yes, but it's got to work for what's right in communities. I was recently in Saskatchewan meeting with the Saskatoon Tribal Council and some of their communities, and they feel that their tribal council is well equipped to support them. And as such, maybe they would not necessarily want a hub model. So we really try to work with partners to determine what's best for them. But I would say the hub have definitely led to better support system and helps in our transformation of services.
Thank you. Ms. Hogan, I have a question about trust among the communities and what's being done here with these water advisories. What do you feel needs to be done?
It's a complex question that I think is linked to one of the issues of meaningful reconciliation. Other witnesses have appropriately testified that First Nations criticized the way the original act in 2003 had been put in place, that it lacked meaningful engagement and consultation. And so that recognizing the need for First Nations to self-determination, but the need to collaborate and meaningfully engage with them is essential. I do believe that we see it in other audits that we've looked at, that there is mistrust at times between certain First Nations communities and governments. But when you have repeated long-term advisories or even repeated short-term advisories, a community can lose confidence in its own water system and then turn to other solutions that are not better for their health. And so it is time for it to be actioned in a sustainable way with communities so that that trust can be rebuilt and reestablished.
Thank you. Ms. Fox, could you comment on that, on the trust factor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of it's one of our biggest challenge when we talk about partnership and when we talk about decades of not being listened to in this process. So I would say that it's got to start with first of all action in terms of investment and support. It's got to come from a place of, and I think that's why the legislation being co-developed is absolutely key. Because I think if legislation can recognize rights, funding, long-term commitments, I think you move the discussion away from just one long-term drinking water advisory over another, but around access to clean drinking water for long-term sustainable solutions across this country. And I think that's what Canadians are focused on. And so I think you can only achieve that through meaningful action like legislation that has regulations around standards of water across this country, and so on reserve, and so I think trust has to come with action, and then with continued partnership, that it doesn't end when you lift. The partnership continues, and for us, it continues well beyond water. It continues with education investments and health infrastructure, nursing stations. It's all about the relationship, and if we don't commit to action, then that relationship will not have solid ground.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that is all the time. As I said, I was going to just survey the room to see if there's agreement that we end today's hearing and turn to the public accounts report, which we'll do in camera. Fortunately, all the members are here, so I'll be quick, but I just wanted to, I'm your servant, so looking for unanimous consent on this, which I have. Very good. I thank the witnesses very, very much for attending here today, both in person and virtually. Thank you very much. I'm just checking. No other notes that I have to make, so I will suspend the meeting just until we clear the room and then come back to discuss the draft report. Thank you very much, Ms. Fox, Mr. Barbosa. Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Hogan, and Mr. Wheeler. Thank you all for coming today. This meeting is suspended. you.